As you look around the world, there are 190 countries, of which 188 still recognize private property, Cuba and North Korea being the exception, and the 188 looked very different, even controlling for differences in per capita income. You cannot speak of market economy or capitalism in monolithic terms. When we talk about the four typologies, we don't mean to suggest that every economy fits perfectly in one of these baskets. We use them as mental constructs, if you will, and some economies are more straddling one kind rather than the other, but frankly, a lot of economies have all four elements. Oligarchic capitalism. This, without question, is bad capitalism. All right? Oligarchic capitalism, what we mean is where the resources and the power in the economy are concentrated in the hands of a few. You look around the world and you find it obviously in Russia. You find it in much of the oil-rich Middle East, and it's not an accident that you find it in oil-rich countries. You find it certainly in parts of Africa and throughout Latin America. The objective function of these countries was not to maximize economic growth, it was to maximize the welfare of the people who were running it, who then, in some cases, put their money outside the country. The reason why it's bad capitalism is that the objective function of the leaders who are running the country is not coincident with advancing the welfare of the people in general. There is no maximization of growth being the major objective of these countries. You see huge inequalities in income, and you see huge degrees of informality. Because in those societies, the people that have the power and the money, they don't want the rest of the people to have property rights and the kinds of accoutrements of market economies that we see elsewhere, because if they do, they can challenge the economic dominance and also the political dominance of the people who are running it. Second kind, state-guided capitalism. This is not communism. Communism is where the state owns the means of production. In a state-guided economy, you still have privately owned means of production, but the state is directing where the resources go. The state uses, for example, state ownership of banks. Even to this day, Chinese banks control a substantial portion of the resources of the economy. India. We think of India as this rapidly growing economy, but still 75% of the banking system is controlled by the state. That's clearly one way you can guide the economy. You can also do it by having import protection, by export subsidies, by regulatory incentives, and so on. But the idea is the state knows what it's doing, and it's going to try to get there. Now, there's a limit, though, to state-guided capitalism, because in essence, when you're far behind the economic frontier, the state can afford to look at the people who are at the frontier, the United States and Europe and Japan, and say, look, these are the industries that are leading. All we need to do is import the technology to making this stuff, apply educated, low-cost labor, and we'll win. And in essence, that's how Southeast Asia has caught up with the rest of the world. It's sort of like the dog that runs after the truck and then catches the truck and now figures, what does it do then? Well, in the case of Southeast Asia, the countries have caught up so much to the point that they're close to the frontier. And the question is, can state bureaucrats, once they're close to the frontier, figure out where to put the money where they don't have a target to shoot at? And that, we suggest, is the Achilles heel of state-guided capitalism. Third kind of capitalism. It's what we call big firm or managerial capitalism. These are the economies of Western Europe and Japan. There's great credit to big firm capitalism, economies of scale, lots of resources to do R&D, and of course capital. Big firm and managerial economies are very good at what we call incremental innovation. Because they are big and because they can afford to diversify their resources, they can establish R&D centers. When innovation becomes routinized, it becomes expert at incremental innovation. And that's what America was great at. It's what Japan is great at. It's what Germany's great at. And that's the advantage of big firm capitalism. Its Achilles heel, it's not good at radical innovation. Because big firms, almost by definition, do not want to invest in new products or new services that can make obsolete what they're making all their money on right now. Entrepreneurial capitalism. These are economies, obviously, that are dominated by new firms. The advantage of new firms is that they don't have a vested interest in the status quo, and they're more likely to commercialize disruptive innovation, which is really responsible for the lion's share of our economic growth. So just quick anecdotally, think about the inventions that have changed our lives that have been commercialized today. Think about the automobile, or the airplane, or the steam engine, or electricity, or computers, personal computers, the software that runs on personal computers, air conditioning, the internet. These are industries that were started by entrepreneurs, not by established firms. And it's because they had the luxury, and if not the necessity, to be able to do something new. Now, does that mean that an economy can only rely on entrepreneurs? Well, unless you're a small economy like Israel or Taiwan that is connected to other economies that have big firms, we argue that the ideal mix is between having managerial firms and new firms. In other words, this constant tension, because a lot of the firms that come up with the great innovations, the big firms commercialize, or they refine, and they mass produce. And that's the ideal combination.